Welcome to the Upland Nation podcast and Happy New Year. Scott Linden here, your host on this weekly journey into the woods and the fields behind a great dog. They're all great. Where we learn, share, and grab a laugh or two once in a while. Should do all of those and more with our guest this week, Steve Grossman. Yep. Pro outfitter and guide, recipient of the Orvis 2020 Lifetime Achievement Award. This guy knows his stuff. We'll be talking both forest and prairie grouse and pheasants from a guy who knows of what he speaks. Let's just leave it at that. Great guest. One of the most popular guests I've had on the podcast. Sure looking forward to getting caught up and learning something, and so will you. Our handling let's see, what do we call that? The Handle It training segment will offer up a couple tricks that I use to help my dogs think for themselves. Maybe you can find some value in them as well. And then we go to the social media platforms and ask you what you do for your dog when he does a fantastic job for you. It's all made possible by Sage and Breaker Gun Care products, Pointer Shotguns, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, TrulockChokes Tubes, and FindBirdHuntingSpots.com. Well, we'll get to what you do to your dogs in just a moment, but I got to just relate. This was so classic, and maybe you've had this happen. All right, so we're out there after valley quail, and, we're getting a little bit better at that. Flick is getting extremely good at it, so much so that we were passing a spot that I gave it, a look and decided we could keep moving, but no. He was in that general neighborhood, so he went down into that little gully with a little thicket of big sagebrush bushes. On the way, he stopped, lifted his leg, and took a leak. Continued taking a leak. Stopped taking a leak, left his leg up. About then, I'm putting two and two together and walking towards him. And it seems like a lot farther than it is because there's 1.5 feet of snow slowing me down. But anyway, at some point, his leg's still up, by the way. He kind of side-eyes me, and then he moves his head a little bit as if to say, hey, man, this is not what you thought it was. I'm done with the bathroom break. So I waltz right in, go right around him, swing wide, doing my best to keep him steady, bust my way through that thicket, get snow down my shirt collar, down my boot tops, and everywhere else, and out of there, one valley quail. I'm so surprised I don't even shoot. In fact, when that bird flies, another one 10 yards away flies. I whoa flick, he's steady to both. Even though I don't have the gun up, so what do? I reach in and I lob one of the dead quail I already have. Let him retrieve that one instead. You ever seen that? You ever seen your dog? Well, it seems like every German dog I've had will point with his back leg once in a while. Maybe yours will too. But that one was a new one on me, and I only wish I'd had a video camera for that. What about you? Well, your dog does some great work too, no matter who you are. I asked on all the social platforms, what do you do when he does a fantastic job? And in my picture, I have one pheasant that Manny, one of my older dogs back in the day, found along the only birdie spot in South Dakota we found that afternoon. It was a long tree line, and he got the only rooster out of there. And I let him parade it around. But you guys have some great ideas. Maybe some of us can learn from you. Michael Augello, he says, anyone within 3 miles will hear me celebrating with him. Brad Fleming gives his dogs the heart of every bird they find, point, or retrieve. And they know they got it coming. Charles Lindquist, this time of year, I'd give him I'd give him a really hot dog, but I get the idea. Hot dogs, yeah, one of the greatest training treats around if you need it. How many of you go to McDonald's drive-thru on the way home? John Swanson does. His dog gets a McDonald's cheeseburger, plain, of course. Chet Michael feeds the hearts. Lots of people going on that. I just wrote a story about that kind of thing. I'm kind of going back and forth on giving the dog guts, especially in the field right there, but that's my problem, not yours. John Wasserman says his dog rides in the front seat, and he's asleep with his head in my lap, my right hand on his back. And John, thanks for the great picture. That is the shiniest black Labrador I have ever seen. What a beautiful dog. Noble head, standing amongst some tall grass, probably waiting for you to say, find a bird. Sleeps wherever he wants, and a lot of good boys. That's Tim Newbrand's suggestion. George Cummins, I just can't visualize, let alone hear you in my head saying, who's a good boy? But I know Samson, and I know he is a good boy. Treats and eggs and bacon, breakfast for dinner, says Larry Scott. And there's another McDonald's fan, John Andrus. So many great ideas. If you haven't looked through that, always take a look. Somewhere in all of those comments is something that you can use on your dog, or for your shooting, or for your bird finding, or anything else. It's all at the Wing Shooting USA and the Upland Nation Facebook pages, Instagram and Twitter, all of the above. And this part of the podcast is brought to you by Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School. You know they're an authorized dealer for Beretta, Blaser, Browning, Guerini, Krieghoff, Rizzini, Fab Arm, Fair, and Siren. Whew. Need to catch my breath. These guys have got the goods, and if they don't have it, they might be able to get it for you, even if nobody else can. The guys at Mid-Valley Clays have a very special relationship, especially with the Browning folks. So go to midvalleyclays.com, then click on the Shotguns tab, then scroll down and click on the online store. And if you don't find it there, call them up. Ask Dave Fiedler to see if he can find one somewhere for you, even if it's quote, unavailable, unquote. midvalleyclays.com. And TrulockChokes, one of the few companies still out there offering a lifetime warranty and a customer satisfaction guarantee. That's right. If something goes wrong, send it back. They'll replace it at no charge. And if you have questions, call them anytime. In fact, I talk to them periodically about types of birds, types of shooting challenges, and what types of chokes would work best. Learn a heck of a lot about how patterns affect your shooting accuracy, and learn which ones are right for you depending on what kind of a shotgun you have and how you use it. Learn more at TrulockChokes.com, and don't forget that lifetime warranty. So good to have him back on the Upland Nation podcast. Steve Grossman. I wonder who came up with that one first. He's a pro guide outfitter, the recipient of the Orvis 2020 Lifetime Achievement Award. You know, they don't give those out very freely, so this guy knows his stuff. If you want to learn more about prairie grouse, pheasants, and who knows what else, bird dogs and all of that, he's the guy. Steve, welcome to the Upland Nation podcast.
It's great to be with you again.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, Happy New Year, too. So lots going on with you. We'll talk about that and everything else under the sun, if the sun would ever poke its head through the overcast and all the snow we've been getting.
I saw that little bit. I saw that big orange thing in the sky a couple days this fall. And so it's been a while now since I've seen it again, but I long for it.
Well, boy, so do I, and maybe everybody else is in the same boat. I am desperate to walk on bare ground. That is my only goal, and some people know, and I talked to you off mic, I'm going to northern Nevada again, primarily because there are so many south-facing slopes we can hunt there, we might get lucky. And even if there is snow, there won't be near as much as there is right here. So,
well, you can jump from south slope to south slope, and you'll keep running out of snow at that point. So
that's
good for you.
That's exactly right. And if I was really smart, I'd just drive further south and spend the rest of the chucker season in Las Vegas.
Are there many chucker down there?
Well, you got to work hard at them, and the climbing is like straight up. Those big hotels are really tough walking. But
how do the dogs work in there?
Oh, he's a big hit in some of those casino shows. But anyway, enough about me. How was your what there was of a hunting season for you?
It's I'm 60. I turned 64, and each year it keeps getting shorter, or the seasons start changing a little bit. I'm not sure quite how to word it, but I started out again in South Dakota, and so I was there for 3 weeks in September, and I was told that the bird numbers were really, really good, and we did have good bird numbers. The last part of the summer, the intense heat and the drought did put a hurt on some of the birds, and we shot a lot of young birds, both prairie chicken and sharptail, but it was evident the birds, the intense heat, they had many days of that 100-degree weather, and that intense heat put a hurt on a number of those chicks and young birds. But overall, South Dakota was good, and Minnesota was better than expected. So it was a good fall.
Hold that better than expected thought for a moment. Let's go back to South Dakota, where I spent 5 days walking around just outside your window there in Beetle County. And what we noticed was, number one, it was really hot, even late October. But that pushed most of the pheasants into those cattails in the low spots. Did you find the same thing happening with you, or were you somewhere where there were no cattails?
Well, the bulk of my South Dakota stuff is all in September. So I hunted prairie birds the entire month of September, then back in Minnesota all of October. And I've got family and good friends that are still hunting here in Beetle County in South Dakota near Huron. And because there's no moisture, really literally there is no moisture.
Yeah.
Many of the sloughs have all dried up, that the birds can go anywhere.
Yeah.
So there's no water stopping them from going anywhere. So I do know that the bird numbers have been good. You got to work for them, but they've had good bird numbers. The family that I've got here have had a good fall, but they're selective in their hunts. They're not hunting every weekend. It's every couple of weeks. But in driving around locally, I'm seeing decent numbers of birds, especially in the evenings. Not so much in the mornings, but especially the evenings. So, it's like anywhere else. It's going to hit in pockets. This summer we had, back in Minnesota, we had storms 10 miles from my lodge, and at the lodge we had no storms. So all of a sudden, when you start looking at that kind of weather pattern and difference between 8, 10, 12, 15, 20, even 50, 60 miles apart, that's a game changer, what's going to happen in the bird numbers.
Absolutely. I've seen that happen over the years in chukar and valley quail country. I mean, from draw to draw, canyon to canyon, we've seen that happen, and it's remarkable. And I guess if you look at it as a positive, if you're getting skunked in that spot, go somewhere else, and the odds are still, they're back to 50-50.
Absolutely. Even when we hunt like when I fish, and I'm not a good fisherman. I'm a better. It's not so much me, it's the dogs. So the dogs produce the birds for us, and I don't have a fish dog, so I got to rely on my other skills, which are not so good. But when the same thing comes when we're bird hunting, we'll get into different areas, and if it doesn't feel good, we'll pick up and move. And again, you're right. At least hope springs eternal by going from one place to another. And you just never know what you're going to hit.
I guess I'm ahead of the curve then, because I am probably the only catch and release bird hunter.
No, you're not many. There are many of catch and release bird hunters. I can assure you.
Tell me about the good season in Minnesota. You're up there. What do you call the lodge these days? Is it the lodge at Little Moran? Is that what we call it?
It's the Grouse Lodge.
The Grouse Lodge.
At Little Moran. Yes.
Good. Okay, and that is actually your website address too, isn't it?
Correct.
TheGrouseLodge.com.
.com. Correct.
Yeah. So make me jealous.
We had, if there's a jealousy part of this whole thing, is that we had a fall finally where we were not, the weather did not stop us a day all year long. The last couple of years we've had some 4 to 6 inch snows late in October. None of that this year. If there was a glitch again, is we had an incredibly wet spring, and the flora and fauna were incredible. I cannot remember seeing so much food in the woods. The dogwood berries, gray dogwood berries, the choke cherries, the wild raspberries, the blackberries. There was food everywhere. Even the bear hunters were complaining that, bears weren't coming to bait.
Oh, yeah.
There was so much food. And so, the grouse were scattered, so they lived everywhere, and they could, where they slept, they ate.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to go searching and looking for food. So we had a great fall that way. If there was any glitch, was that it was so dry late season that the woodcock kind of changed their patterns a little bit, because it was so dry. Even in the swamp edges, they had a hard time feeding. So where we typically find woodcock later in the year, we did not. So what we did then is we continued to hunt grouse, but then all of a sudden the dogs would pull us into unknown areas in unknown places where we'd pick up woodcock here and there, and all of a sudden we started getting into more woodcock. So it was another learning. Every year, the birds don't read the books. They understand life for them is survival, and they do what they need to do to survive. And so again, this year we had very good grouse numbers. It wasn't over the top good, but it was very good as in comparison to years past. And we had good woodcock. So overall, we had a good year. The weather was nice. If there's any drawback to that real dry weather, is you got to carry a lot of water for the dogs, because that becomes an issue. But overall, it was a good fall.
Do you see this cycle that everybody talks about? There are some even biologists who argue there's no such thing, but for ruffed grouse, a lot of people still believe there is a roughly a 10-year cycle. Do you see that in your hunting?
Myself, I do not, and I have tried in the biggest ways. I've tried to follow a cycle pattern and cycle that, but no, I do not. Myself, I don't see that. We've kept a daily journal and a log dating back to 1987.
Wow.
And this was my 35th year with the Grouse Lodge in Minnesota. And when I look back at those numbers, I can't base things on a 10-year cycle. Too many variables, I think, come into play. For example, last year, I think the grouse numbers were helped in Minnesota because we had a huge snow, and ruffed grouse, of course, need good snow depths in the coldest of the winter for roosting conditions, and we had that last year, and so I think that was a huge aspect. And so, to answer your question 100%, I do not follow that cycle kind of a pattern.
Well, that's fascinating, and if you're a hardcore grouse hunter, it's probably encouraging, because there are people who will simply look at numbers and say, "Yeah, I'm going to take up chess this season instead," and I don't like to see that, and most people probably don't, but there are some out there. Let's start with your South Dakota early season experiences. What are you chasing mostly out there, and give us a mental picture of where you are.
So I'm out in the southwestern part of South Dakota. southwest of Pier, about 80 miles. I hunt a lot of tribal ground, and I hunt a lot of non-tribal ground. And the thing that I like about the tribal ground, yet even with when I was on the Cheyenne, is I'm impressed by how the tribal land is, how they manage the tribal pasture land with criteria of, if you overgraze, you what they're doing is trying to discourage overgrazing. So if you overgraze, you get marks against you for when it comes time for the next lease period. And so the interesting thing was, and I think even with this last year's drought, the last 2 years really, actually, there were a lot of pastures that we went into to hunt this fall that hadn't seen any cattle on it. So in many ways, a lot of those pastures were not grazed over. And it's interesting how, when you read back on how the sharptail and prairie chicken follow the buffalo, because they like that grazed over prairie, because what it did, it gave them enough cover and enough habitat to escape predation, but it wasn't so heavy that they could not remain cool during the heat of the summer.
Yeah.
And so I think, in looking back at a lot of the covers that we hunted this fall out there, if it was areas I had hunted the last couple of years that the pastures were grazed but not overgrazed, we had good birds in them. This year, those same pastures weren't grazed at all, and it was really too thick a cover and too heavy, and the birds weren't using them. They were using cover where there was more grazing, not overgrazing, but more grazing, just to keep the habitat at bay.
Yeah, there's a fine line in there, and I've actually seen that on a few slopes over the years. You can almost draw that line sometimes, and it might be at a fence, or it might not. It might be due to something else, water supply or something like that. Hey, you're listening to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden. That is Steve Grousman. Okay, go ahead. Tell the story.
About how Grossman came to be?
Of course.
I had a good friend, and he's guided for me for years, many, many, many years, and we still are greatest friends. And he does a lot of field trialing and has a great number of English setters yet. And it was years ago. He said one day we were out, and it came about. It just popped out of his mouth. He said, "Grossman, what do you think we ought to do?" And he's kind of, from that point, others heard it, and they looked at it and said it stuck.
It's
Instead
classic.
of Grossman, he called me Grouseman. So it just, how that came to be is, I think it was the designer of the stars, the keeper of the stars, came up with that one.
I love it. It's so apropos. So good on you. I'm glad you got it, and it's deserved as well.
Just lucky again.
Yeah. So, I made a study of sharptails, and I'm still doing it, actually. And so I'm always looking for advice on sharptail hunting. If you were to offer me some suggestions about habitat or strategy, what would you tell me as a rank beginner? Pretend I've never set foot on the prairie.
I guess, if anything, the first one would be is to hunt a prairie or hunt pasture or prairie ground where you can maybe see the ground. You don't want bare ground by any sense. There's no cover there, and the birds will see you. So when you enter a prairie, if it's that bare, they'll fly out the other side, just like a wild pheasant. When you enter an area, they'll hear the car door or the motor.
Yeah.
They're gone. But a lot of it is kind of a happy medium of thickness of cover. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's been slightly grazed, there's plenty of cover. The birds can squat and hide, especially early season. We're still hunting in days where, the afternoon temps might get up to 96, 98, when we're out west. And even when it's that warm, the birds don't want to move. There's no reason for them to move. They're not going to waste energy. So, if it was heavy, thicker cover, the birds are going to overheat, and they don't like that. They're a big, heavily feathered bird. They got feathers continue to their feet, so they want to stay cool just like other critters do. So they look for shade. or they look for a lighter cover. And I think that would be one of the first things would be to enter a habitat or a pasture or cover where the cover has been grazed over, but it's not tabletop thick or tabletop flat.
Yeah.
But there's enough cover yet for those birds to find escape routes.
I've had good luck on the high spots in that kind of country. Is there any consistency to your experience with Sharpies on the knobs, the higher points?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They like to be able to where they can see.
Yeah.
So they're either if there's a little knob or a little knoll on a prairie or on a pasture, that's always a destination point.
Yeah.
And so is the plum thicket, or so are buffalo berries or snowberries. Those are destinations that we go to. And so they like to stay on just the lee side of that hill. They're not in the brunt of everything, but they're very close. So if you get too close, they've got an easy escape out of all that cover.
Yeah.
I just think in many instances when I watch sharptail or prairie birds flying preseason, they will fly into a pasture or an area and they will use something as a destination for them to fly to, whether it's a small little plum thicket or if it's a buffalo berry or snowberry. They will fly toward it or close to it, and then they move into that cover so they can get some shade.
Yeah.
So when I watch them use that and use those destinations, I use those destinations when I hunt.
Yeah, and I've had good luck at them, and I never realized how important shade is until it got really warm out there, and it's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
For fun, we had a biologist on a few weeks ago, and he said great sharptail cover is grass that is that you can see bits and pieces of a soccer ball in it, not the whole ball.
Yep.
But bits and pieces, and I love that analogy. That's probably right along the same lines of what you just said.
It's give and take. So it's not you can't see ground, but if you look close enough, there's the ground.
Yeah.
It's not that bare or barren, but it's been used, and I think that's a big part of it.
How about ringnecks? Did you do much pheasant hunting this year?
Myself, I did not. After the with age comes wisdom, and after 30-some years of chasing these critters, I had parts that were starting to give out on me. So I had a new knee put in on November the 14th. So that kind of took me out of play for the remainder of the season. So I've not chased any pheasants this fall. So I had a big September of chasing prairie birds in South Dakota, and then all month of October hunting grouse in Minnesota. So I'm on the road to recovery. I had a new hip put in last February, a new knee. I'll beat the dogs to the point next year.
Yeah, if the TSA will let you through the radar machine.
I quit flying. If I can't drive there anymore with the dogs and my wife, and we like the road trip. So
amen. I hear you. Yeah.
There you go.
Well, it sounds like you had a full season anyway. Let's go back and switch to the ruffed grouse thing again, because again, that's one of those things I'd like to learn more about. So you mentioned all these food sources, and it strikes me, and I'm hearing this more and more often these days, with grouse in particular, just like you said, with bears, for example, or in a lot of places with other critters, the big game guys have got it figured out. They look for food sources.
Absolutely.
More and more, do you find yourself starting with that, or do you have other tried and true habitats that you like just as well?
In most cases, when they go in with a clear cut in our part of Minnesota, when it's a clear cut or I should rephrase that. It's not so much a total clear cut. It's more of a selective cut.
Uh-huh.
But nevertheless, they're still doing a lot of cutting. And with that cutting, then that brings back the gray dogwood for dogwood berry. It brings back a lot of hazelnut for the hazel catkin. Birch trees, young birch, they like the hazel. They like the birch catkin on a birch tree.
Yeah.
Along the logging roads, once that ground is disturbed with the loggers going in and out, the clover starts coming back, the wild strawberry. So really, and that's, I think, is what makes the ruffed grouse such a great game bird, is they live in their refrigerator. They live right near their food, so they can go anywhere within their habitat and there's food available, whether it be, again, crab apples, thorn apples, high bush cranberry, dogwood, etc. There's always food available to them. We find them, their crops full of acorns and wild strawberry, clover, you name it, and they're eating it in the woods. So to choose a place based strictly on food, I do not. I like young cuts, that's one, but then I also like over mature habitat where you've got, maybe it's a piece of aspen that needs to be cut.
Yeah.
That's just kind of in its late stages, maybe 25 to 30, 35-year-old aspen. And the reason I like that is it's self-thinned itself after the clear cutting. And so what it's done is created enough ground cover with hazelbrush and dogwood and a variety of different food types. So the grouse, I think they move just like other things. I know the clear cuts are so important for the raising of the broods and the chick raising with both woodcock and grouse, but I think those birds move as the year progresses. So I find more birds in that older cover.
Well, that's fascinating because I've never heard that before. But as you describe it, I'm thinking of a hunt I did up there at Grand Rapids once, where the trees were really big, and the ground was everything's relative, clear.
Yeah.
But they were there, and so what are they doing in that kind of habitat?
I think that I still am I will always work edges. So if I go into a cover, if I drive by a place, the first thing I look at is what is there for edges. Is there a swamp edge? Is there if let's say, for example, it's in the middle of a big, let's say a 600 square mile or a section, and all of a sudden there's an old cut that borders a young cut, which is very evident. So you've got like a 10 or 12-year-old aspen standing, and you've got a 30-year-old aspen standing. That dividing line is very evident between the two types of habitat. So I will hunt that edge because those birds like edges. They still like pheasants. They like an edge. The sharptail like an edge. They like that diversity in cover. And so I will hunt that edge or swamp edge. And in more times than not, if I'm close to those areas, my dogs are running big enough where they're not where I'm wanting them to be right now. If they're 100, 200 yards off this edge and they start finding birds, then I start changing and hunting where the dogs are wanting to hunt.
Duh.
But for most part, I always have the dogs hunt for me, and I always want to work those edges in those likely areas. Why those birds are in that older stuff? The only thing that makes sense to me is food is more readily available. It's not readily available in a young 2 or 3 or 5-year-old aspen stand because the aspen is crowding most everything else out. Yeah,
good point. You know, the other thing, especially if you talk pheasants, for example, people will say it's a scape cover.
Yeah.
So at certain times of day, maybe it's that as well. Fascinating. We're going to talk about keeping your dog cool early season. We're going to talk more about handling dogs. You just said something that really interested me, and that's getting your dogs to work for you. If I ever figure that out, maybe I'll write a book. Oh, wait a minute. I already did. Anyway, lots more to come with Steve Grossman. We've also got that Handle It dog training segment coming up. So, Steve, relax for a moment while I make a quick commercial announcement, and then we'll be right back at you. And that announcement is for my good friends at sageandbreaker.com. Just like it sounds, 1A in Sage, 1A in Breaker, only 1E in Breaker, sageandbreaker.com. You know, I mentioned earlier my friends at TrulockChokes.com and their lifetime warranty. Well, hey, I must be picking some pretty good sponsors because Sage and Breaker offers a lifetime warranty on their gear as well. And did I mention soon there will be a new I guess I'll call it a gear bag for lack of a better term. I think Fred Bohm, the founder, calls it a range bag. You can use it for whatever you want, even if you never go to the range. So get on the mailing list and you'll get advance notice of when that new bag is available. And also, if you didn't take advantage of the Christmas cleaning combo, it's because you weren't on the mailing list. So sign up for that at sageandbreaker.com. They won't inundate you with garbage, and they never trade off their list with anybody else. Get notice of future sales and new products at sageandbreaker.com. And welcome back to the Upland Nation podcast. Steve Grousman, Grossman. How's the knee doing, by the way?
You know, it's doing great. I had the knee done on November the 14th, and it was interesting because I had a very good friend and a neighbor take care of my dogs for the last month, and so I drove back to Minnesota yesterday, picked my dogs up, so I've got them with me now back out here and back in Huron now. And so, you know, putting dogs in and out of the truck and back in the trailer, I was wondering how it's going to go, but so far everything is good, and I've been very fortunate. But when my knee was done last February and now, or excuse me, my hip done in February, my knee now, it's a game changer. It's a life changer. How it helps me get around anymore. So for many years I've worked with a lot of different physicians and surgeons and hunted with them, and their first question was, well, when you get it done, not if, because you're going to need it. Just when it does, put it off as long as you can. And yep. I just turned 64, and so I'm happy that I did, and it's life changing. It's incredible. So things are going well. I couldn't be happier.
And I'm on my way. Both of them. I won't list the problems, but I will suggest that if you're a parent and you have a child and he's playing Little League Baseball, do not let him be a catcher. That's all I'll say. Let's get back to the birds and bird hunting. Of course, that's the topic all the time around here. You see all this stuff, and you have to be very kind because they give you money, and then hopefully they tip your guides well at the end of the day. But you guys sit around after everybody else goes away, and you trade stories about some of the dumbest things we clients do. Can you narrow that list down to a couple thousand?
The number one, and the number one thing is positioning yourself to put yourself in play for a good shot.
Yeah,
that's the biggest thing that people that they do not do. They don't think of positioning themselves. No different than a soccer player. Position yourself on the football field where you have a great opportunity to catch a pass. The biggest thing, and so many times it's a classic example, a very good friend and a longtime client. We were hunting sharptail again this year. He was out here with me in the prairie, and it was the same thing that took place the year before with the same guy. We had two birds that flushed, young birds that flushed quite a ways out. They went into a plum thicket. And so he was with one of the guys, and I was just photographing. And what he did is he walked in the same side of the plum thicket bush as the guide did. Huh. So that left one side totally unmanned. Yeah. So where do the birds fly?
Duh.
They fly 100% of the time on the side of the unmanned side. When it was all said and done again, he came up to me and he said, "Geez," he said, they went out the wrong side on me. And I said, "Tom, the wrong side, my God." I said, "We talked about this last year. You stay back a little bit. Let the other guide get around the top side of that plum thicket." So he's already causing those birds. They don't know where you're at because they can't hear you. but they hear him coming, and so you're already down in position for a prime shot, but you took yourself out of play. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
That, and the other thing is, and I know we've talked about it, we did last year, we got a good laugh of it. Our guys, when they walk up to a doggone point, they stop at the doggone point. And they don't continue through. It just doesn't, it's just not going to happen at the dog. It's going to happen out front. And you can't get that through people's heads.
Well, I understand. I'm not laughing at anybody, for the record.
No, it's
I'm laughing
an ongoing occurrence
with us, because we've all done it. And I'm pretty well trained now. My dog has got me figured out. He slams a point, and then I say that word that starts with a W, WHOA.
Yeah.
And you know who stops? Me.
Yeah. So it's meaningless to the dog at that point. But with the other hunters, and I said, you guys got to keep moving.
Yeah.
Get past the dog. Get up there, because it's not going to happen here.
I figured this out. I was watching a replay on a show I made years ago, and I realized, we're all good about that. If we got 9 guys in a row, we're walking down standing corn and we're trying to chase birds to the other end where the blockers are, we all understand that. But we have to be blockers in a lot of other places as well. And
absolutely.
And that is a perfect example. Don't let the escape route be ignored, I guess, is a way to do it.
You got to fill all those gaps, fill those empty spots as best you can.
I love it. Of course, shoot straight, shoot safe, but scatter yourselves.
The other interesting thing is, and it's an interesting kind of a way of from moving from the prairie to the Grouse Woods in Minnesota. A lot of my hunters that hunt with me in South Dakota hunt with me in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're on the prairie, because they can see the birds, and there's a lot more, you can see it all happen. The good things with the dogs, the bad things with the dogs, and it's all out there in front of the Lord and everyone. So everyone's going to see it happen. And when you're on the prairie with open prairie birds, when the bird flushes, more guys will keep their head on the stock and keep their head down. But when that same hunter is in the grouse woods and a grouse flies across a trail or down a trail, because they don't get to see a rough grouse and wide open very often, they think, oh my God, it's so beautiful, and they don't get their head on the stock and they shoot over the top of the bird. And I had a good friend years ago and went to a very high-end shooting instructor, and the first thing he did is they put him on the trap range and they videotaped him, and when it was all said and done, he said, the birds you're missing, you are doing what? He says, I'm not getting my head on the stock. He said, that's exactly right. And he said, the guy I hunt grouse with in Minnesota, when he says I miss a layup, he said, that's what I'm doing. I'm not getting my head down. And this instructor said, you just saved yourself a lot of money if you'd listened to him. And that really becomes an issue where people, when they get a good look at a rough grouse, for example, because they see it in all its glory, because they don't get that kind of a look, they don't get their head on the stock, and so they're shooting over the bird. And so that's another big thing, is not keeping down on the gun, on your head down on your gun, and bringing your gun up to the stock, and just a good proper gun mount.
Yeah, all of the above. Shooting like a predator is how one instructor described it to me. If you are so focused on that bird, the rest of the mechanics come together a little bit easier. But speaking of that sort of thing, what if it's not a wide open shot as he's crossing a trail or something? How do you convince yourself that it's okay to shoot a couple trees en route to dropping that grouse? Do you just have to do it 1,000 times, or is there a way to just ignore those trees?
You just have to put the trees out of your mind. And the great thing is, and I'm very thankful, and I'm glad that we can provide that bucket list hunt for so many people. And that's with a lot of guys on their first grouse hunt is their question is, how do you get a gun up in this kind of cover?
Mm-hmm.
After a point in time, you just position yourself, and that's the other part of positioning yourself is if a dog is out working in front of you and you're in likely cover, instead of moving, I stop in an open spot in case a bird should blow out wild. At least I've got room to move the gun. That would be one.
Yeah.
Number two is try to find an opening. When we're guiding with our hunters, once the dogs go on point, we want our hunters to be able to get into a spot where they can move the gun, and when everyone's ready, then we'll walk into it to flush the bird, so we can help things that way. But it really is, it's one of those things where you just put it out of your mind. It's not easy to do at times when you're getting slapped in the face, time and again with tree branches and everything else. But if you see the bird, that's your shot, and that really is your shot. And most shots in the grouse woods are going to be, no more than 25 to 30 yards, just because the foliage and the habitat just won't allow you to see better than that.
Yeah, so
it's not a long shot.
No, definitely not. And you like you said, somebody described it as shooting at a ghost. You may or may not believe it's there, but you got to believe it's there when you pull the trigger. You just said something that I've been wondering about a lot, and that is, I get this question more than most people, and I'm no expert at ruffed grouse hunting. What kind of a load are you using on those birds? And does it change over the season?
I'm a firm believer in 7s and 7.5s. Mm-hmm. I just am. And it was interesting. He's an incredibly good friend, and he's a fee task shooter. He hunted with me for this is his 22nd or 23rd year. He's 87 this last fall. He was 87 when he hunted with us, and he still made the All-American fee task sporting clay team.
Wow.
And he shoots the international, the championships. He goes all over the world still shooting a lot of clays. And the whole thing with Joe is, I shot with him out in Pittsburgh a few years ago at a place called Rolling Rock. It had an incredible. It was a live quail walk, with clay targets. It was the most incredible quail walk I've ever shot. So I shot it one time with 8s, and the next time I shot with 7s, 7.5s. And it was without question the difference that I could see with the better hits and how the birds were hit. And he pointed it out to me. It wasn't so much myself, how much more intense and dense the 7.5 was. And so, it goes through the foliage good enough. It's enough foot-pounds of energy. That's just my feeling over all the years. And most guys are shooting at 20, a lot of 28s, some 16s, but 7.5, 6 shot is okay, but you don't need anything bigger than that.
Yeah, and especially if you might encounter some woodcock along the way, you certainly don't want much more.
No, you don't need others. You just you're overbagging, overkilling it. So you're just being overdone, and you don't want to do that either.
You've been around. I'm not going to say, how many years you've been a hunter, because it's been way longer than me. In all that time, can you think of a hunt that will never, ever not be front of mind with you?
There's numerous, but yes, there was one, and he's just a great longtime friend from Southern Virginia, and he had a phenomenal big white female setter named Lily, and I had a little female, and it was interesting. Mike Gaddis coined or classified her, called her the little ballerina, because she was strong. She was like she was strong, athletic, and honest as the day is long. And very few bird dog guys are going to tell you every dog I've had has had plenty of holes. This dog had fewer holes than most. And so we hunted this particular cover this one afternoon, and it was like both dogs on the ground, and it was like swapping goals in the Stanley Cup Game 7. First it was Lily had a goal, then Drummer had a goal, then Lily had a goal, then it was nonstop. And we hunted a cover that was a big swamp edge, and it was one of those most memorable moments. And when we got to the truck, we both looked at each other, and you knew it at that point. You don't have to say it. We of course we did, but it was so great because each dog did super. They backed, they honored. It was one of those that was one of them. And so, but I've been so incredibly fortunate and blessed to share those days with so many good people that it's got to be all come out in a book. And so that's kind of a plan for this winter now after recouping with my knee. And so we've got things in the making for a Grossman book, and we'll see where it ends up.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it already. So keep me posted on that. Yeah, I can relate to that hunt. I had a quail hunt like that where I still had 3 or 4 birds left on a limit, which I never get anyway. But the thought comes to you, how can you top that? Well, you can't. So let's call.
You can't. No.
Yeah. So
at the end of the day, I remember those, and there was one other one that came to mind, and Mike Gaddis had called me and says, I'm working on a new book, and he said the basis of the book is going to end up being the basis of the book is going to end up being a story about a grouse and a grouse dog that. Is that going off? Can you hear
it doesn't
that?
bother us. We know you live a life,
Okay, well, I'll move to another spot.
All right.
Alexa, stop. So the story was where Mike called me and wanted to know if I had a story about an old grouse and an old dog that had a battle, a long-going duel. And if there was one that did the dog ever win, and there was one time it did, and it was actually, the great thing was it was with the same hunter, John, that I'd hunted with I just described this hunt with his dog Lily.
Yeah.
And long story short, we did pin this bird. The bird had won and beat this dog numerous times. This day, the dog won, pinned the bird where he was totally handcuffed, totally naked when he got up because he went out into a swamp. And the shooter happened to miss the bird, but the dog won, and the bird lived. So it was a great ending to that story. And so he had written this. It's his last book. This last book that he written is called Duel on Tabernacle Mountain.
Love it.
And that was based on the story of this dog Mac and this rough grouse. It was a great story.
It's funny. Just change the word grouse to whitetail, and you've read that story a million times, but you've never heard a grouse version of that, and I'd never thought about it before. But sure enough, I have a go-to spot where I could probably tell a story similar to that. Yeah. 99% of the time you miss the bird for some reason, whether you shot or not. We're getting towards the nubs here, and I do want to ask a little bit about dog handling. You mentioned keeping your dogs cool early season, especially out there on the prairies of South Dakota. Is there anything that you do that we should know about besides carry a lot of water? I mean, is anything else we can do?
That early in the year, I make my hunts really short, so it's more of a loop than anything. So yeah. If we park on a little knoll or down in a draw, we'll say, well, I'll kind of plan out, here's where we're going to hunt. We're going to hunt toward that hill, make a loop, and bring it right back to the truck. So we may be out, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, if that, and we're back to the truck. And, it's the thing that I don't want to have happen, which did to me years ago when I was out on the Cheyenne, is even though that was our intent was for that, but all of a sudden we got into birds, and the birds kept pulling us further from the truck.
Yeah.
And I did have a dog have an issue with that. So, I make the hunt shorter, and if we need to, I'm not going to put that dog's health in play again. And so, yes, carrying a lot of water, but I make my hunts pretty short, so I'm not going to go on a big march that early in the year.
How about handling dogs in the field? You guys, you professionals have all sorts of magic things that you do that we don't even see when we're out there with you. Is there something that we can take away from that? Can you tell us one thing we should do with dogs to maybe ensure steadiness, for example? Or like you said, you want a dog to work for you, whether that means going left or right. It's your decision, not the dog's. Explain how you get that done.
When I even when I'm in the prairie, I always, when I approach an area that I'm going to hunt, I've got it kind of in my mind how I want to work this strategically. If it's and with today with Onyx and different maps and things, you can see where the edges are and you can adjust and see how you want to hunt it. But if there's an example, if there's a draw that's got a lot of plum thickets and snowberry and winterberry and buffaloberry that I know those birds are using, I'll work those upper edges and let the dogs drift down into there. But in most cases than not, the biggest thing is I hear if from a compliment standpoint is, my God, you never talk to your dogs.
Yeah.
And I don't talk to them. I let them do their thing. But if I do need to nick a dog, I keep my transmitter in my pocket. No one sees me pull it out of my pocket, and I just hit a little nick, and that turns them. So I'm not constantly hacking at my dog in order to bring them around where it becomes hurtful to my ears or to my hunter's ears that I'm continually screaming at a dog.
Yeah.
If I can't, and a lot of it, of course, again, is your early season conditioning before the season starts, and tightening the screws and putting everything kind of back at reset so you're good to go, and that really is the biggest thing.
Yeah, I've started using the tone, not the beep, but the tone on a collar in the same way. That's almost as good as any other command, if you want. And that's exactly what I use mine for, is to turn him the other way. Do you go ahead? No,
it's much the same. You're making contact with the dog, and once the dog knows what it is when you make contact with them.
Yeah.
The thing is, again, is being consistent. Don't just use the tone today and not use it the rest of the season. Yeah. Use it all the time, and you'll be just fine with that.
Yeah, and overlay it. When you're first teaching, it's just like every other command. You got to overlay it with a verbal for a while or whatever.
They have to know exactly what you're wanting out of that. Yeah. Absolutely.
So how do you teach that to begin with? We're talking about the end product of that training. We want a dog to go that way, not that way. So is it about your face and your direction you're walking? Do you give a command and teach it? Is there an arm signal? Tell me more.
Well, the interesting thing is, even when I did all that work for Purina, and I was at a lot of the great field trials, and riding and walking with some of the top handlers in the country, the dog is constantly at some point, if they're hunting with you, and that's the number one thing, is they can be at 200 yards and glance back at you and know where you're at. That means they're still hunting with you.
Yeah.
And so if I'm on the prairie and I want to change my direction instead of hacking at a dog, I'll start drifting like I'm on a horse, and I'll start walking to the left. I'll say to the hunters, all right, guys, we're going to start to drift right, and we're going to head to that plum thicket over there. Pretty quick, the dog, you can see him out front. They'll start drifting and come right with you. They naturally want to be to the front.
Yeah, I agree.
I will change my stride or the direction that I'm going, and the dog will eventually end up working to the front, and then we're back on course. So if I want to go back another direction, I'll start drifting again another way, and I'll tell my hunters, and so all of a sudden the dog will start drifting back the other direction. They're still hunting for me. Where it makes it really difficult, especially in the grouse woods, and I've had some very good grouse hunters that hunt by themselves that follow their dog through the woods, and they're very successful. However, they know what the dog is doing, and they can tell by the bell where the dog is at, and they just is one person to follow the dog. But when we have hunters or guides out, and if we're 20, 30 yards apart, they can't adjust to that kind of movement the way you can as an individual hunter following your dog.
Yeah.
So that kind of a hunter and their dog that he follows the dog through the woods like that is very difficult for me to have as a guide and a guide dog, just because my guides can't interpret or understand where the dog is at the same capacity that you are as a dog handler.
Yeah.
So in all this stuff, I always want to make my dogs handle for me. They're hunting for me and stay in front of me, and that's all accomplished by the early training with check cords. And there's times when I'm in the grouse woods, and it helps even on the prairie, where I'll just hide behind a tree and let a young puppy sit. They'll all of a sudden, if they look back and can't find me, then they'll hunt me back and find me. Then we continue on.
Yeah.
So I don't want them yo-yoing back in and out, but I want them to always be in touch where I'm at, where I don't have, if anything, it's an old term field trialers will use. It's called singing to the dog, where if they sing to the dog, it's to let them know where to let the dog know where I'm at.
Yeah.
You hunt accordingly. It's not a command for you to come into me, but it's just, here's where I'm at. You hunt accordingly.
Absolutely. And there are, please do not really sing, people, but
No,
make a noise.
It's not singing. And it's, you bring up a good point. In all actuality, a lot of people will use something like a vowel.
Yep.
I won't use O because O and O sound so much. I don't want to confuse the dog. But, there are just a number of things that you can do just to let the dog know where you're at. And it's not commands or not hacking on the dog to bring the dog in. That's not it at all. It's just letting the dog know where I'm at. And especially in the Grouse Woods, if I'm, if the cover's heavy, a lot of foliage, even if I'm singing to the dog and my hunters are 20 yards apart from me, they still know where I'm at. So it's a form of communication both for the dog and the hunters.
Yeah, and thank God for that, because otherwise you'd have to put a collar on each of the hunters too.
Oh, that becomes frustrating.
Oh, there goes the tip too.
It does. Yeah.
Leave us with one bit of practical magic. In your vest or in your truck is a piece of gear that we never thought we should have. What is it for you, Steve?
Oh, it's a great question. I guess if anything, it would be a wide blaze orange collar that's an elastic collar that can slide over the dog's neck.
Yeah.
If I happen to have two dogs in the ground or someone else has a dog in the ground, if the cover's heavy or if it's that would be one thing that I'll wear on a dog on occasion. Dog boots, I used to, but I don't so much anymore because I'm not hunting in that kind of cover. I guess if anything, with my setters, I use, I keep these, it's like a hair splitter and to pull the big mats out and different things that way.
Yeah.
I always keep Benadryl on my truck, when I'm out in the fall. And a couple of years ago, when I went further southwest of Pierre, it was a little bit more snaky ground, so I bought all my hunters, and I keep about 8 pairs of snake gaiters in my truck, but I keep Benadryl in my truck as well for dogs, etc. And you just, like anything else, would be a well-stocked first aid kit because they're all animals and things can happen that you can't even begin to imagine that could happen. So I guess if anything, it's to be well prepared, and if I don't use something in my truck, there are many things I have in my truck that I've never used over all these years, and so but it's always in my first aid kit. If it's there, it's there. But other than I'm pretty. I fly by the seat of my britches. I've got good collars, and the dogs, we're in good shape, and. So there's really not one smoking gun that I would say would be the ticket that is my go-to. I can't. I wish I could. I'm trying. I'm thinking, and my ears are smoking. They're coming up my ears, but I can't think of anything.
Well, you thought of a whole bunch of things, and I'm glad for the reminders, and so is everybody else. That's Steve Grossman. Learn more about his operation, both ruffed grouse and woodcock up there in Minnesota, and prairie grouse. It's all at theGrouseLodge.com. This guy knows his stuff. We'll be talking again down the road. So glad the knee replacement has gone well for you, Steve. Hopefully it will continue and you'll be back and chasing those prairie birds September 1, 2023. Happy New Year to you. Thanks for being part of the Upland Nation podcast.
The best to you and all your listeners, Scott. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you.
And we've still got a lot more to cover. Not a lot, just a few things, including reiterating some of the things that Steve just mentioned in our Handle It segment. He beat me to the punch on a couple, but I don't mind. I'm just glad to think great minds think alike. It's all brought to you by PointerShotguns.com. You want to start a new hunter with the new year? They've always got guns in stock at their dealers, whether it's the independent dealers who carry their Pointer shotgun line or some of the big box retailers. Go shopping at the PointerShotguns.com website and then find a dealer there as well. Remember, they're a work of art at a price that's a thing of beauty. My new side-by-side is coming very soon. I cannot wait to try it. Yeah, they've got a little bit of something for everybody. No matter where you are in your shotgun career, you'll find something to meet your needs at PointerShotguns.com.
Handle it.
Yeah, I may be a slow learner, but most of the time I'm still smarter than my dogs, and I can use that to my advantage when I'm training. And Steve talked about one of the tricks I'm going to experiment with a little bit more that I haven't used for a while. But all of these little tricks, and I use that term on purpose. Those tricks can add variety and mental challenge for your dog. And I'll tell you, more and more, the more I work with Flick in particular, I realize that he is really up for some mental challenges as well as all that exercise we need to get a German wire-haired pointer. As Steve said, hiding from a young dog when you're in the field encourages him to stay aware of where you are. So enough said about that. When you're working with birds and you want a dog to stay steady, plant 2 birds in the same spot, flush one, and then flush the other one so that the dog understands that there's more than one bird in many cases, and I better stick around for that other bird or that other remainder of the covey at the same time. You spaniel guys, you use helpers on each side of the maximum distance for a good spaniel cast in front of you. And those guys are dropping live birds out there once in a while so that the dog says, well, I got to go that way if I want to find a bird, and then I got to go that way. All little tricks that you might do to keep your dog on his toes, so to speak. They all might work. And if you're looking for more advice about that sort of thing from me and from all the pros that I've worked with, check out findbirdhuntingspots.com and just click on the Your Bird Dog tab. Well, thank you all for participating this week. Thanks to Steve Grossman. You can get more information at thegrouselodge.com. Appreciate all of you who contribute at the social platforms, always learning something there. If you left a rating or a review, thank you very much. Appreciate your kind words. Thank you to all our sponsors. They're the ones who make this all possible. Sage and Breaker, Pointer Shotguns, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, and TrulockChokes. And particularly thank you for listening. I hope you have a fantastic 2023. Enjoy the entire year, and particularly the next bird season. I'm Scott Linden. Thanks for listening to the Upland Nation podcast.